Today, July 4th, 2025, the U.S. debt clock had a message about how we are declaring ourselves independent from the Federal Reserve. Also on the debt clock site, they had a PDF book that you could download, and this is the download here, and I'm going to read from it as I go through it. So the book is called The New Money Revolution, A Golden Age. And remember, this is what Trump has said we are in now, that we're in a golden age. And so the next page has these 30 different categories of discussion. And so we go through those 30 one by one. And each of them is going to be a page. So the first one is the Den of Thieves. And this talks about how Jesus went into the temple of God and cast out all them that sold and bought in the temple, and he overthrew the tables of the money changers. So this is interesting, as is noted, because this is the only time Jesus showed any kind of aggression or anger in his entire ministry. Cheating people out of their money was something he would not stand for, as well as the fact that money changing was happening in the house of God. So then they tell us that we are witnessing a crime of monumental proportions, and our labor and life energy is being stolen from us by a system that was designed to transfer our wealth to a small elite class of money overlords whose only desire is power and control. And all they offer to us is misery and bondage. And I'm sure that most of us have certainly experienced that misery and bondage for most of our lives. So page 2, we go to the tally system. And here it tells us that actually there was an era where, before banks existed, where money was counted on tally sticks. So people didn't actually need to exchange money. They could just use these sticks to record how much they paid or owed to each other. And this also tells us that we currently have the technology to create a system that frees us from the fractional reserve banking scheme that has enslaved us. We can again create an asset-backed currency where we again become the owners of our own life, liberty, and property. Imagine that. We own our own lives instead of the government owning us. That's what was meant to be in the first place. As we know, but the dummies do not yet know. The normies, the sleepers, think that it was always meant for the government to tell us everything that we're supposed to do. The government is supposed to boss us around. We have to live in fear of the government. Absolutely not. That is totally backwards. The government has become a criminal, and it has overstepped its bounds enormously, and it needs to be shoved back into the small box in which it belongs. And the people need to become free again. So we go back, we go to page 3, the Bank of England. So this describes the way that the debt system originated. And it also explains how wars put people and nations in debt. And this, of course, is what has enriched the global cabal, the crime syndicate that's run our government and our world. They have imposed debt on us and made us all slaves, debt slaves. This explains how the British were trying to govern us in the colonies, and how the Revolutionary War occurred because we were trying to get free of British control. In page 5, we see the history of failed fiat currencies, which explains that the way to destroy a society is to debauch its currency. And the Federal Reserve dollar has lost 97% of its value since it was introduced in 1913. So here we are told about the new USA dividend dollar that is a revolution in wealth preservation. Next, we're told about the silver swindle, how silver has been the central medium of exchange for centuries, and how the big banks knew that they had to artificially suppress and illegally control the price of silver to maintain the illusion of value for their fake fiat debt money system to continue. In other words, those who wanted to enslave us had to rig the price of silver and keep it low in order to do so. And this should also hint to you that once this rigging is stopped, the price of silver is going to skyrocket. Next, we hear about greenbacks. And here is essentially a history of how we ended up with the Federal Reserve. And here is a crime of 1873. So he's talking about how we ended up with the Federal Reserve based on some things that happened in 1873 to create a panic and depression. And these were the planned calling in of greenback dollars and the demonetization of silver, which led to a stock market crisis. And this is more about the crime of 1873. And here, what is the value of silver? Let's look at, here we have a chart of the value of silver, the dollar to silver ratio. And we see, here's our little hero guy, and he is saying that he prefers silver. During these 100 years, if you only had 1 ounce of silver, that would pay you for a day's wage. But today it would take 10 times that to pay a day's wage. So the war on silver has lasted 150 years. And they tell us here that the true price of silver is between 10 and 20% of the price of gold. So if we know that right now, for instance, gold is $3,500 an ounce, then that means the true price of silver should be anywhere from $350 to $700 an ounce, which is more than 10 times what it is right now. And also, the price of gold is likely to go up in the future, and it may go up to 10 or 20,000. If it went up to 10,000, then the price of silver would go up to $1,000 to $2,000 an ounce. The Federal Reserve. This tells us about the Federal Reserve System, and it was established as a master class financial scheme. It was a crime, so diabolical and obscure that for over 100 years. No one has deciphered its code of destruction. Well, some people have, but they've been suppressed. It's not federal, and there are no reserves. It's a banking cartel, and it's a criminal cartel. Here we have the money creation magic show, the tricks that the Fed uses to create money. It's an illusion. It's not real. So they've created this illusion that money is backed by real world assets. In fact, the money that we use is backed by debt. So it's not backed by anything real. Next page. The Federal Reserve, from the time of its inception on Jekyll Island in 1910, has been used to extract wealth from us to the elites, the criminal cabal. It skims, it says here, 20% of all our wealth to the top. And they knew when they created this that we would be trapped in a debt spiral that we could never escape from. As we know, our national debt right now is over $36 trillion, and it's exponentially increasing. I think just over the last year, it's added another trillion. So we would always be in debt, which means these wealthy criminal elites would always control our nation in that sense, and then they'd control all of us. The money supply. During the Depression, in the early 30s, 9,000 banks failed. And this was after the Federal Reserve had said they were going to improve everything. Everything was going to be much better with this Federal Reserve System. So here we are told that the loss of value in the dollar is the worst financial crime ever conceived. In a sense, though, it is the best financial crime. It's the best. It's been the best for the criminals. It's been the worst for us because of how we've been victimized by it and preyed upon for all our lives, essentially. And again here, the debt money system, it's hard for people to believe, but our money is issued as debt, unpayable debt. It makes no sense. So if you're paying, like if you're buying a loaf of bread, you're not paying with anything of value, you're paying with a debt for that loaf of bread. Theft by another name. So this was designed to be a complex system so that people would not understand how they were being cheated. And they thought that they could hide behind this Ponzi scheme and charade forever and that we would never figure it out. And here it's inflation is a hidden tax. Inflation only happens because we have this debt-based financial system. Interest rates are killing us. Interest on everything. Interest on loans, interest on mortgage, interest on credit cards, interest on everything is killing us. And that's part of this debt system. It's usury. It is unlawful. And yet they're doing it, and they've been doing it for a long time. The elephant in the room. So imagine an upside-down world where the people are paying more in interest than we're paying in total taxes. That is the world that we live in. Here derivatives are explained, and these are a little hard for me to understand. But this is another of the criminal games that the bankers play, is the use of derivatives. Tariffs. Now, Trump has made a lot of tariffs, and all the Democrats were criticizing him about tariffs, but tariffs were the way that the government was funded prior to the existence of the Federal Reserve. And even if the tariff was relatively small, 3.5% of GDP, tariffs could bring in $1 trillion a year in revenue. So essentially, tariffs could bring in enough revenue that we could get rid of the income tax, which we should have never had in the first place. And it's clear to all of us who pay income tax that we are killing incentive by taxing income. This makes people want to have less income, especially because the more income we make, the higher our tax bracket, the more we have to pay in taxes. It makes you want to just give up everything and live on welfare. And it's why we have a lot of people living on welfare, on Social Security, on SSI, on disability, because they're tired of this bullshit. Okay, now we go into money. What is money? So, money. What is theft? What is wealth? Okay, the money system that we've had thus far is theft. It's taking our personal property, depriving the rightful owner of our property. Wealth is when there's an abundance of material possessions and resources. And it's when we have purchasing power instead of when we're losing purchasing power. So this one explains the difference between liberty and tyranny. Liberty allows us to have debt-free currency, and where we can have boundless wealth, as opposed to the central bank digital currency, which would have been a prison, where we are monitored on everything we buy, and we could be limited in how much we buy. Here's the big bank squeeze, and here's how we can get out of debt money. We stop creating debt. We replace debt dollars with U.S. Treasury dollars. This tells us we're going to end the Federal Reserve. Now, as we've seen, Dodge has been tracking all the government fraud. So this is what we should have been doing from the beginning. We should have had an audit trail. We should have been tracing expenditures. We should have been tracing where our local governments spent their money. We haven't done that. And as a result, our money has been siphoned away and laundered and sent overseas and sent into the pockets of the elites. Devolution. That's an interesting term. Devolution. Here's a picture of how we can eliminate property taxes. Isn't that interesting? Here is a plan, which I expect is likely to happen, where we see that we're going to stop the printing of new money and bonds, and we're going to have the interest rate go to zero on new Treasury bonds. We're going to have the printing of the new USA Treasury dollar. And we're going to see that the world wakes up about how the debt money system has been a fraud. Transfer of power is going to go back to the people. We are going to end fake money, stolen wealth, and we're going to have no more property tax, no more income tax, no more social credit score. We're not going to have credit cards with huge interest rates. We're not going to have mortgages with huge interest rates. We're going to have these things replace property tax, so there's no property tax. So here's how money can be reinvented. So we're going to go from debt serfdom to wealth freedom. These are all the problems that we had under debt serfdom. Federal debt, corporate debt, household debt, our individual debt, and our state and local debt. And now we're going to have freedom. We're going to have freedom in precious metals, minerals, real estate, stocks, and new energy. We are going to have asset-based wealth. And here's the declaration of we the people. On this 4th day of July, 2025, we declare our independence from the Federal Reserve Bank. So I don't know if this is actually happening today in some form. The debt clock is not run by the government. It's not run by the Trump administration directly, but it has been giving us messages for a while that have hinted at the end of the Federal Reserve and the beginning of our freedom and the golden age. So I think it's run by the White Hats. So that is this, and it's a wonderful message, and let's just hope and pray that we actually see this happening soon. It would be wonderful. It would be a miracle. It would be the best thing to happen in all these years that we've been waiting.